Keith Storton,
Here.
Charles Bourbeau,
Here.
Karen Bright, Jeff Heller,
Here.
John Hammond, Sheila Blake, Debbie Arnold, Lynn Compton, Bruce Gibson,
Here.
Adam Hill, John Pasham. We have a quorum.
All right.
Oh, Robert Enns, I'm sorry. And
you.
Charles Bourbeau. I skipped past the board of directors. Aaron Gomez,
I am here as well.
Robert Enns,
Here. Now we're good.
now we're good.
I don't actually have the other agenda in front of me, but I'm assuming we're taking public comment, right? On the agenda. Right. Okay. Do you have them?
Charles Bourbeau's there.
Does Patty have the public comment phone?
I'm sorry. Barbara Asper Nelson is handling those from our office. And Barbara, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, and you're going to pull up the public comment?
Oh, yes, sorry.
Items not.
Okay, so at this time, anybody attending, you can raise your hand at the bottom of your screen, or if you're on the phone, you can hit #9. Oh, I had one hand. I thought I had a hand, but I don't see it. There we are.
Sorry, Barbara, did you say no hands were raised?
No, I have one hand. Janine ran. Just give me 1 minute.
Okay.
No? Okay. Sorry, my timer just crashed on me. Minutes. Okay. Share screen. Okay, Janine, are you ready?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay. Greetings, everybody. And I'm Janine Rands, and I live here in San Luis Obispo City. And I'm participating today because I am passionate about trash and recycling green waste. And I'm now aware that this consultant firm has been pulled in to help us strategize. So I'm thrilled that you're going to work on that today. And I know that the areas of waste management are real complicated and larger than most of us care to even want to be involved in. But it's what we see on the street side coming out of our houses that I've determined that the average citizen in my neighborhood, and I'm sure my neighborhood is complicit across the city and the county, that our residents, users, and taxpayers do not understand the bins and what goes in them. And they're like, I've seen on your websites, they're wish cycling. Just last night, I passed by bins that in the gray bin, and there's a food waste, a green bin right next to it. All their food waste is in the gray bin. So I'm asking today for better educational components, better compliance of our existing ordinances, IWMA transparency. I had difficulty finding documents for today outside of the JPA and the strategy management that's on the website. I could not find today's document from the consultants. So I had a friend sleuth that out for me today. But we also, in the county, desire a clean and protected environment, not just for ourselves, but for our future generations. And this board is obligated to help us do that. So having been involved in the most recent efforts of the polystyrene ordinance, of course, I'm very disappointed to know that your board postponed that. That the carry-out grocery bags have not been followed, and everyone is arbitrarily doing that by themselves. You know, we've asked for utensil ordinances, and of course, then I encourage you wholeheartedly to support our state efforts of AB 1080 and SB 54 that's coming up in this fall's legislation. So I'm planning to be here the whole time, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Janine. Do we have any other hands raised? Okay, Brooks, that is all for public comment.
Thank you.
All right. So that brings us back to what we're here to do, the board's strategic planning.
Okay, and there would be public comment for items on the agenda.
Okay. Public comment for items on the agenda.
Do you have any hand raised, Barbara?
So I do have a comment about that because they don't have this agenda.
This was the agenda that I believe was sent out. It's.
This wasn't.
Oh no, that's the worksheet regarding the presentation from the.
Yeah, but how is the public supposed to comment about something they've seen the very basics, but they don't know any of these details?
Well, Mr. President, we might go ahead with the discussion, and at a point where we're
Yeah,
about to wrap up a piece, and see if there's any public comment on what they've heard. That might be a way to do it.
Or if there's some way that we can visually show this, and I don't even know how many people are watching.
Well,
You've got a presentation, right? This is the PowerPoint that you're going to show, Brooks?
Yes, Rob Hilton, HF&H, our consultant, will be doing that. And we just met, I think we just got the numbers tallied up and they came down yesterday. And so we previewed the presentation yesterday morning. But I didn't know that that was imperative to have on the agenda itself, all that detail, I thought.
Well, I mean, I'm just trying to be a spokesperson for the public, since this is a very difficult forum to have the conversation with in general, just because how this is done. Having read the agenda that we did have, it's very vague, so to ask for public comment on the front side of that without any discussion about even what's really being presented.
Mr. President, what I would suggest is that we see if anybody has any comment now based on what's on the printed and published agenda. But in our city, when we have a day-long strategic planning session, we allow public comment multiple times, not after every, not every 20 minutes or something, but, so if we have a presentation here and some discussion, and then maybe allow public comment. So it's just to see as we go along every 45 minutes or so if there's public comment on what's been discussed.
Okay.
I mean, at your discretion, since you're running the meeting.
Is it possible, Mr. Chairman, to post this PowerPoint online right now?
Great question. I have no idea.
Because I agree with you. In Morro Bay, the system that we've got the PowerPoint presentations in the agenda. And there is a lot of detailed information. So, I don't know, can you get this posted right away?
I don't know, Rob, can you email that or?
You've got a thumb drive of it, so if there's somebody that's able to post it.
Okay, I'll work on that.
She says she's online and couldn't hear all of our comments. Maybe because of the mask, maybe because we don't have the mics close enough.
Now
Makes me blind because it fogs up my glasses.
That too. All those things.
So while we're waiting to get that loaded, if there is public comment for anybody that has looked at the current agenda, let's see if that's open and then we can move on.
Okay, so at this time, if you have public comment on items on the agenda, you may raise your hand, and I will call you in order. Looks like Janine Rands will be first. Give me 1 second, Janine. Okay. Okay, Janine, you should be unmuted. And are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
I was one of the people looking for the agenda, and I do have 2 computers open, so I'm able to peruse an agenda. It would help me during this 4-hour period. Also, your chat button is disabled. So if we want to make a comment by chatting, that would be great if that could be made open. And I can hear you all very well, so the masks don't cause any problems here.
Or post it on our website. Okay, post it on the website.
Thank you. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Janine. Okay, anybody else for public comment? I do have one on the phone. If you wish to make a comment, just hit *9. If not, that's okay. Okay, it looks like that is all for public comment.
Thank you. And just so everybody is clear, we'll be making public comment available throughout the session. All right. So now are we into the planning stage?
Sure. All righty. Well, thank you all for being here today. We've got 4 full hours of content for you and 3.5 hours to do it in. So we're going to try and move quickly through some of this background stuff. We've provided you with some of the data. Can you go and hit the chart? So I'm not going to go into a lot of details. I do want to say in working to build the baseline understanding of what's going on in the system and the current performance of the system, it was unusually challenging to get the data, but we now have it. We know that the haulers can get it to us. We know a format that works for them and works for us. And so it's now something that is kind of set up to be able to trend this information over time now for you so that you can monitor performance around these things. But we wanted to make sure you had some good baseline data as we talk about different issues in the system to ground truth. You know, is that really what the data tells us is happening? So let me give you a quick overview of the day, and you do have a more detailed breakdown of our time together today. Some of the objectives that you all told me when I first met with you were your objectives for having this meeting. And I think the most common theme that I heard from all of you through the interviews and through the board meetings that I've been at is we need to get a clear common understanding of what it is that this agency does and what it doesn't do. And I was very impressed through the interviews. It seems like there is a very common understanding of that, except for maybe 1 or 2 items. And so I think that'll be the focus of today. And many of you told me during those interviews, we really all just need to get into a room and talk about that. There are these couple of things that aren't in sync, and we need to talk about them and work out what they are and what they aren't and what the limits of our scope is. So I think today is a great opportunity to do that. We're going to start with a little background information to set the sort of common understanding of how everything is working and what the history of the organization and the issues facing the organization are. And then we're going to transition, hopefully right around 2 o'clock, into working on that mission. And we're going to do that first, because that's really been the thing, I think, on most of your minds is what is it that's the mission of this agency? What's the expanse of that? What's the limit of that? And so I want to dive into that first. Then we'll talk about the values. Once you know what you're doing, you can try and understand what value set you apply to those activities, to that mission. And then I'm hoping we're gonna have time to really get into your vision for the organization going forward. We'll start to get some unifying themes around the vision, but we'll be bringing this back to you at your next board meeting to really hone all of this down. I don't think we'll get 100% done today. We'll need to kind of take your feedback and work on it and bring it back to you to confirm some things. So that's our big picture agenda for the day. Let me launch into the presentation, and I believe that this is visible to the folks over Zoom. All right. Next slide. Launch into the first set of data. I usually have a clicker. So some information here on housing mix. This probably is not super surprising to many of you, but one of the things that I identified in this is economies of scale are important for all of you. None of you have a big enough community to really drive economies of scale in and of yourself. The county's the only one that sort of has that scale, but it also has scope. And so because the county is a large geographic area, the scale, the number of customers it has, the number of participants in the system actually make it very similar in terms of efficiencies and things to the cities. And a lot of the efficiency in the county areas relies on being able to cross route into the cities and provide services between the unincorporated and the incorporated areas. Next slide.
May I say something?
Yes.
Grover Beach didn't seem to make that list.
It didn't. I am sorry. That may be that we didn't get the account data from your hauler.
You think? Oh, from the hauler.
That may be. The waste characterization information. This is using CalRecycle's waste characterization studies that they do throughout the state applied to your information, your population, your business mix in San Luis Obispo County. And the thing that's interesting in this is 26% of the material going to the landfill right now is not something you can recover in your programs. There are things that require upstream solutions to prevent the waste from happening in the first place, because those particular commodities are not recoverable through existing systems that we have. So 74% of what goes to the landfill today, you have programs and mechanisms today that you could recover that material. The other 26%, you got to work on new strategies. Next. This gives you some information on what landfills are receiving your material. No big surprises here. It's mostly in county and a little bit of stuff making its way into the Central Valley. Next slide. Oop. One back. This shows your residential tonnage by material type, by program for each community, where the combination of the blue line and the green line are greater than the black line. That means you have better than a 50% recovery rate. We did this math for you on the next slide. So you can see each of your jurisdictions and what your residential recovery rate is. In other words, of the material that your hauler collects, how much of it gets recovered for recycling or composting versus how much goes to disposal. So these numbers are sort of mid-pack for the state of California. Nothing super outstanding either direction in this. This is fairly common for residential. Next. These are your commercial programs, and you can see there's a lot more disposal and a lot less recovery in the commercial and multifamily programs. This is going to be a focus area for you upcoming. Next slide. And you can see in some of your agencies, you have a 0% recovery rate in the commercial and multifamily sector. Your haulers are telling us they're not recovering anything from those customers. Other communities, the county, Paso, San Luis, have some pretty expansive programs, good participation, but not a lot of material getting in. So you're seeing these things in the teens and 20s in terms of diversion rate, as opposed to your residential that's in the 40s and 50s and 60s. So these, again, are going to be focused programs for you going forward. Little rate comparison for you. I know it's always interesting to look at how do your rates stack up versus your neighbors and other people in the county. So here it is. Next slide. And this tells you of the customers in your residential system, what size containers do they subscribe to? Are you a community like Morro Bay has the most 20 and 30 gallon container service? In other words, people have really downsized their garbage service. They seem to be participating more in recycling. So you can see how that sort of stratifies for each community and what the rate incentives have done to motivate behavior. Next. And then this is commercial and multifamily recycling participation by community. And what you see here is that there's a fair bit of recycling participation. People signed up, they have a container, but if you look back at that tonnage data, it doesn't look like there's great utilization of those containers. We're not getting a lot of participation or active participation. And then the next slide shows you with organics, which is a much newer program, has good saturation in a couple of the communities, but definitely more work to do around that organics implementation for commercial and multifamily. So that's the background on data. We've talked a lot about SB 1383 and the drivers there. I also want to remind you there are a number of other things that the IWMA is responsible for managing from a regulatory perspective, going all the way back to AB 888 on HHW. You guys have a very active program on HHW. It's one of the things that you're known around the state for doing very well. AB 939 obviously was the genesis of this agency and the reason that you came together. And then subsequent laws adding mandatory recycling, setting higher goals for recycling rates statewide, and ultimately SB 1383 that we've been talking a lot about. So you've seen this before, SB 1383 implementation timeline. This hasn't changed. We're still looking at January 1, 2022 for program effectiveness and January 1, 2024 for enforcement. It requires you to adopt a number of ordinances and policies in each community that mandate recycling, mandate participation in food recovery systems, have a bunch of reporting and record keeping, deal with construction and demolition recycling, deal with water efficient landscapes. So there's a number of ordinances and policies that you'll each need to adopt. You'll have to have collection and processing. Oh, there you go. See, Morgan even gave us a list of them. Long list of things that each of you will need to adopt. As we've looked, many of you are missing big chunks of this, and none of you have all of the pieces of the puzzle yet. So it's a local ordinance that each of your cities and the county would need to adopt. You'll have to have collection and processing. The good news is for most of the county, that's in place. There's an expansion that needs to be done to make sure that every generator, single family, multifamily, commercial, has food scraps recycling available to them, but you guys are well on the way. In addition, you need to add some monitoring of that participation in working with your hauler and your recycling coordinators in your communities. On, back. Edible food recovery. You need to make sure that you've got systems in place and education in place to tell people how to donate edible food that is available for human consumption and maintain a bunch of records and do a bunch of reporting on that. Each of your agencies has purchasing quotas, a specified amount of compost, mulch, renewable natural gas, or electricity generated from organic waste products in California that you have to purchase. You may need some way of coordinating and aggregating that activity because your agencies will have a very hard time using all of the stuff that you're being required to purchase. And then lastly, monitoring and enforcement. By 2024, there is an expectation of the state that those ordinances that you passed become enforceable with monetary penalties in them. And that is an activity that can only be performed by a public agency. You can't delegate it to your hauler. You can't delegate it to a private code enforcement firm. It has to be performed by a public agency. The state has built the system around a lot of notice in order to correct, notice of violation, warning. They've built a long system in there before they write the first citation. So the goal is there's not a lot of citations, but it also means there's a fair bit of administration up to the point of getting people into the system. And so that enforcement results in a significant labor requirement following up on these things over time. And then you need to implement record keeping and reporting systems. You are a regional agency under the state law. You are responsible for reporting as an agency for all of the member agencies. They look at your programs as a single program. And so despite the fact that there are differences among the communities, you report as a group. And so aggregating all of that data and being able to report to the state within 10 business days of their request for any of this information is going to be a critical element. And again, won't require a huge amount of labor, but it's important that there are good systems and processes in place to do that. We'll talk a little bit later on what can and can't be delegated. Ultimately, jurisdictions are responsible. As a regional agency, the regional agency is responsible for any fines or penalties. If a jurisdiction is on its own, isn't part of a regional agency, they are individually responsible for the fines and penalties and for all of the compliance requirements. There are certain things that you can delegate. You can delegate education, you can delegate route monitoring, you can delegate all the collection and processing programs, but there are a number of things you can't delegate, like enforcement. That has to be done by a public entity. You may be looking at partnerships. You know, who's already out there doing these things? We have food inspectors going in and doing the edible food inspections. Maybe that makes sense for them to be doing the food donation program. So there are some things like that in the strategic plan that we're going to present to you as options of how you deal with this. But the point here is ultimately, as a regional agency, you are responsible for how this gets implemented in each of the member agencies. Talks about some possible responsibilities for the regional agency. One of the things that you guys identified to us was the regional agency ought to be this technical resource and be able to support each of the cities as they navigate the implementation of these things and negotiating franchise agreements and rate adjustments and ordinance changes. And so being a resource there, whether it's by providing models or just being at the table to assist. Planning and managing these new programs, centralizing the management once the franchise agreements are putting the programs in place and the systems in place, potentially having the JPA oversee those things to make sure there's a coordinated approach. Managing self-haul and backhaul registration. There could be dozens or even hundreds across the county of self-haul registrations. Having those folks are required to report to you. You have to know who they are, all of those things. That's a role that you could perform. The product procurement requirements, as I said, each of your agencies is going to have to buy a certain amount of this stuff and use a certain amount of this stuff. The JPA can be a technical resource for how that works and may even be able to find ways of routing that material so your agencies don't have to take possession. The annual 1383 monitoring activities, the desktop compliance, the lid flipping, the waste characterization studies, the education and outreach to the edible food inspectors, all of that stuff are things that could be done much more efficiently at a regional level rather than repeating it out at each agency. It really is a multiplier effect when you do that. And then managing, as I said, all of that record keeping and reporting requirement. Patty's managing all of the AB 939 reporting requirements currently, but it adds 8 to 10 new reports under SB 1383 that need to be prepared each year, and a living document called the implementation plan that they can come and review within 10 days of their request. And it has to be queued up, managed well, ready all the time. Next slide. So we looked at, that one's gonna be a lot better for us. We looked at what it would cost and how many people you would need to do this in 2 different models. One, centralizing everything through the regional agency and having the JPA perform all of the SB 1383 functions except for the collection and processing that your franchise haulers do. And then a member agency model where we said, okay, pretend the JPA doesn't exist and each of you needed to do this on your own. And what it works out to is that we save 4 to 5 employees by doing it in a regional approach, and we save about $500,000 a year by doing it in a regional approach. So in a time where we're really concerned about municipal budgets and pension liabilities and things like that, there are some very clear benefits from doing it in this more consolidated manner. So that's the background information that we gathered from you and from your haulers and synthesized. I wanna, now, if I could, orient you up to the chart at the front of the room where we're gonna spend most of the rest of the day. So the architecture of this, the framework of this chart, is that all of this stuff down here represents your history, the context for your organizational structure, what has happened. What is the context for what we're talking about as we look up at what's our mission, what are our values, what's our vision? It's important to understand the context that's set for that. So through the interviews we had with you and through working with Brooks and Patty, we've tried to pre-populate this so that we didn't spend 2 hours on that exercise today, but I want to walk you through some of the key pieces of your background context that drive how we think about these things. So you were born out of AB 939. When the state set the 50% requirement and set the $10,000 per day municipal penalty, your agencies got together as a group and said, we'll do better by shielding each of the members from the liability and pooling resources and sharing diversion credit, sharing program responsibility. So that's how you started. And you coordinated around what new programs would be implemented with the haulers, recycling programs, green waste programs. Standard school education got born very early for you guys, and you really blossomed that. That's the thing that I think most people know you for. You're touching 30,000 students a year in that program, and then they're touching their parents and cousins and things like that. You're known for community education. You get out there and provide the brochures and the flyers and the outward-facing things to businesses. Your HHW facilities are award-winning. Your programs are award-winning, especially with the take-back programs that you implemented in the mid-2000s. You've got universal messaging now across the county about what goes where. What are accepted materials? What are prohibited materials? How do you participate? And that unification has made it easier as people go across jurisdictional boundaries to work and play. You've adopted a number of ordinances, most of which, up until the plastic bag ordinance in 2012, were unanimous ordinances that helped businesses and helped folks in the community get rid of materials free or for low costs. And you dealt with some tough materials. Pharmaceuticals, sharps, mercury-containing thermostats. You implemented mandatory recycling as one of the first communities statewide to have an ordinance on that. You have benefited, all of you over the years, with your bundled diversion rate. So because you're pooled into one group, where other small agencies like yours see a lot of volatility in their diversion rates if there's a large construction project or a big gas station dig out or something like that, they see their diversion rates ebb and flow. Yours are fairly stable over time because you work as a group and as a larger unit. So these small things that start to cause problems for other agencies are smoothed for you in different ways because of that pooling. Another thing you guys are known for is your grant funding. You've supported a number of good projects over the years that support waste reduction and recycling. So that's an important history to start from. It's also important to understand the environment we're working in now. You've been working since that time with no real strategic direction. There's never been a mission, there's never been a vision statement. It's been very practical and very operational. And so you all identified the need to do this, right? You've got the DA investigation going on. You've got the financial audits going on. The county's talking about potentially withdrawing. You've got the impact of COVID on your budgets and on your communities and on your businesses in your communities that has really changed things. As we look at your hauler agreements, we find that they're, even the ones that have gotten signed in the last couple of years, 20-plus-year-old agreements in terms of what they contain and the sophistication of the industry that they reflect. So there's going to be some significant upgrading that's going to be needed in your relationships with your haulers over the next little bit. That leads us into some of these critical issues going forward. You know, can we continue to provide the economies of scale that the agency was built around? Is that still possible as we implement 1383? How do we engage with industry? We heard from some of you, we need to be regulating industry more closely. Things have been a little bit too fast and loose. We heard from others of you, we need to be more supportive of industry, more business friendly. What does that look like? I think engagement with industry is going to be critical because one of your keys, you have a staff of 3. you need to leverage public-private partnerships. You aren't going to be able to do these things alone as an agency. You need your haulers, you need your processors and your recyclers. So how you engage with industry is going to be really critical. How you go about enforcing SB 1383 is going to be critical. It's one of the most tough political issues in the regulation, is the fact that you have to go out and enforce against businesses and residents. That has its own administrative issues, political issues, scope of control issues that people are going to be very interested in how you deal with. You've been hearing a lot from the public. The few meetings that I've been to of yours get many times more public comment than other solid waste JPAs that I attend. People, because of what has happened recently, are looking, and because of some of the environmental pressures that are going on, are paying attention and asking for more. So all of those things, how we handle those going forward is really critical. And we've got a bunch of challenges ahead of us. The industry is getting a lot more complex. It's not just put stuff in a garbage can, have them collect it and take it to the landfill anymore. There's sophistication in the separation of materials. There are certain materials we don't want in any of those containers. We want them to go to a hazardous waste facility, or we want them avoided from purchase in the first place or reused. So as it becomes more complex, it becomes more important to educate. And that's one of the things you guys have hit over and over and over again in my discussions with you, is the importance of the community education function that you have. How does emerging technology in the industry, in communication, in advertising, help you and challenge you going forward? You need to evolve with that. People are consuming things in very different ways. Services are being provided in very different ways. How do you ride that innovation? You're going to have cost and rate increases. SB 1383 is going to come. It's going to add more programs and services. That's going to cost something. You're going to be facing that, and that's going to come in conflict with your businesses and residents saying, we don't want rate increases right now. We're going through tough stuff. That's going to be a really challenging one. Working with your haulers to upgrade their data management is going to be a big issue. The systems that they have in place and the reporting that they've provided us are not adequate for what 1383 is going to require. And coordinating with them and supporting them and making sure that that works well going forward is going to be really critical. So that's the background and context. As we talk to you as board members, we heard some interesting things about what you want the organization to do and what you want its core competencies to be, or what you think its core competencies are. And one of the things that we heard loud and clear from almost all of you is the JPA should be the regional expert. They should be available support to each of our member agencies as these issues come up, so that we don't have to have solid waste staff at each of our agencies. They should be supporting our city managers as we're negotiating new franchise agreements or rate adjustments. As we're implementing new programs, this should be the group that sort of makes sure that there's a common thread about how they get operated and how they get messaged. And then again, leveraging the public-private partnerships. We heard from almost all of you the critical nature of taking the small staff that you have and leveraging it against the other resources that are available from the industry locally. So I don't know how I did it, but I managed to get us back on track with our 1:50 break. Mr. President, is this a good time to take a break for the group, or would you like to open it up for public comment?
We do have the links to the overview presentation and the agenda here online. And so Barbara can share those online and people can look at it and go to the links on our website.
So once those are up, maybe we should take a break and then have public comment.
I was going to suggest so that if any of us have questions, now would be a good time to ask before we forget those questions. Questions on his presentation.
Sure.
You mentioned during the 1383 presentation about new ordinances being required. And you talked about certain things can be delegated to the JPA, certain things can be even delegated to haulers. But when you talk about ordinances, are those required to be individual city ordinances and a county ordinance? Or are those ordinances that can be adopted by the IWMA as a regional entity?
I believe in your case, they could be adopted by the IWMA because of the way that your powers sit, that they go within the county and into the cities. They're applicable, so I don't think you each need to separately do it. The one thing that you may need to do separately has to do with the model water efficient landscaping ordinance that the state wants each agency to have. And that's something that happens at your building counter rather than at the JPA. So that's one thing that each agency may have to do if you haven't done it yet.
Could you repeat that? I'm sorry.
The model water efficient landscape ordinance that the state passed a couple of years ago, there are features of it that they want to make sure are in each agency's municipal code.
I see.
And so that would be the one thing that I don't think you could do as a group, although maybe technically you could.
But some of those ordinances levy requirements on businesses and individuals.
Yes,
Is that
sir.
right?
Yep.
As well as on haulers, I assume. and stuff
Correct.
like
It regulates your franchise haulers, self haulers, single family residents, multifamily residents, multifamily property owners, businesses, business property owners.
that. And to the extent they're required by state law, how much discretion is there in those anyway?
A little bit.
It's very small amount.
It allows you to go beyond, there are exceedance opportunities, but there are minimum standards in 1383 of what you have to adopt. And so the question will be, do you want to go beyond that for some reason?
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
Thank you. One of the things you mentioned, and I've not had individual conversations with anybody in this room, was the county having a possible interest of withdrawing from the IWMA. And certainly that's kind of the elephant in the room as we move forward and decide what we're going to do with the strategic plan. So I don't know when we broach that topic and have that discussion, because I don't have any details on that and what that means to my city.
Yeah. You know, the goal today is not to debate or negotiate the county staying or leaving. I think it's fair to have a quick status update on where that sits and what the requests that the supervisors have made of their staff is. But my sense is the outcome of this process might strongly affect whether they stay or go. In talking with each of the supervisors, I've gotten a sense that there is a path to staying in with certain parameters. And so I think the discussion about mission and values is an opportunity to figure out, is there a way of organizing this so that they are more comfortable staying? And if it's organized to make them more comfortable staying, is that something that's comfortable for the rest of you? So those are the things that I'm really looking forward in the discussion we'll have right after the break. That's what's the mission of the organization? What's the limit of that? What's the expanse of that?
I mean, that creates so many confusing scenarios for me, because now we have two of those members that aren't even here. And now you're acting as an individual, creating a pathway that they may or may not stay in without us knowing what the ramifications of that are. That seems really sticky to me.
It is.
And I'm very confused as to how that would work when it comes down to these mandates by the state. So then if the county were to opt out, then they would have their own staff that would then follow the mandates, and then the cities would then follow along with the IWMA. Is that how that would work?
You would each need to choose how that would work. If the county left and it was just the county that left, there would be certain economies of scale and certain value. If the county and Paso and Atascadero left, it would be a different dynamic. And whether it would make sense to continue as a JPA might be influenced by the loss of that scale. But yes, generally, if the county were to pull out of the JPA and reassume all of the solid waste powers itself, it would need through its own staff to be in compliance with the requirements of the law. It would also require sort of redoing some of the things with the state around how diversion gets calculated and redoing base years and things like that.
Is there general knowledge as to why the county would be wanting to pull out of the JPA? Do we all know this, or am I the only one that?
We have a couple of supervisors in the room. I don't want to speak for them.
Yeah, I'm happy to comment on it. It's a threat by 3 supervisors who are unhappy with ordinances passed by this agency. And it's ideological in nature. It's a sense that it's incorrect to have to tell people to do things. And despite the financial consequences of that, as you saw, a doubling of the cost for getting these things done, I am told, I have not heard this directly, but I'm told that 3 supervisors on our board have decided that if the nature of the IWMA is not to their ideological liking, they'll take the county out and deal with the consequences.
And yet 2 of them aren't here.
3 of them.
We're not here, she said.
Well, 2 of the
we're
ones
not
that
here
made the threat are not
for
here.
this.
3 supervisors are not here, correct?
Well, right, but okay.
Could I point out something there? If the county goes out, special districts will go out with them. That's 24 special districts. All of the unincorporated communities in the county will also go with them.
Why is that?
We have no choice.
They're part
We're
of
a
the
part of the
unincorporated
county.
county.
The
All
unincorporated
unincorporated.
communities are part of the county. They're governed by the county.
So does that put us in a position of creating our own business, our own trash hauling business?
Well, you're a city, so.
Can I jump in just really quick? It doesn't put you in a position where you need to create your own trash business. All the 7 cities can remain if they choose, right? So, and you still have your hauler contract with your city. If the county leaves, your city still has a contract intact. So, no worries there.
Well, that's small comfort for anybody else.
Well, the county pulling out does not mean the cities pull out. They can have their own separate JPA.
Yeah, okay, but I worry about the entire entity here. We can't-
Oh, yeah.
Just
That is so disturbing.
Really quick, and I think this is a super, super important thing. It's already not been. It's not just the ordinance here that the counties and the unincorporated areas.
Yeah, when she's done.
I live in Los Osos, for example. You now, or if I live in Los Osos, would not be able to go to one of the HHW facilities in the county. Because I live in the unincorporated area. Or of the county. So you have a lot of people who will be excluded from HHW. We scan their driver's license, we'll have to turn people away. So it's not just the issue of the ordinances. It's deeper than that. You know, there's some awesome programs in this county that some people will be excluded and we won't be able to message to them so that they can understand why they're not allowed to do it.
Ms. Arnold?
Yes, I'll be happy to speak up because I made the motion to have a discussion. And I don't know, Robert, what you're saying is, I always feel like it's something talking this, but I'll put it back on. What you're saying is CSDs, which are governments in and of themselves. I don't believe, and this could be a question here, or we would have this presented to us in the fall when we'll agendize this question of whether or not we proceed in the JPA. But I believe that any CSD or any other standalone government can belong to an IWMA or JPA if they want to. We would be talking about county, the county as a government, and you would be separate from that. So that would be a good question to ask. But I believe as a government, you would be able to join a JPA as a CSD and your customers. But we already had Wade Horton, our CAO, come in after the problems that we had with the money and all that sort of thing. And he came to this board and said, we're thinking about having a discussion of bringing what would be the IWMA under the umbrella of the county so that there could be better oversight. So we wouldn't have happen and we wouldn't be in a DA investigation, et cetera. And this board said, nope, we're going to carry on the way we are. And by saying the way we are, I think that from what I can see, and we're asking for a full discussion by the Board of Supervisors. I disagree with Supervisor Gibson that much of what he said wasn't my motivation for asking for a discussion about our continuance in the IWMA, and I did make the motion. When the IWMA and the JPA was originally created, you mentioned a lot of the reasons, a lot of the benefits, a lot of the collaboration and so forth and so on. But I will say that legislating by this board has been controversial. Almost a little shy of half the population lives in unincorporated areas. So we represent as a board of supervisors 47 or something. The census will come in new and maybe it'll be a little different, but let's call it 45. Let's call 45% of the population in the county. When 3 supervisors, in other words, when we do things as a county to policy over the unincorporated areas, it's a majority of our board of supervisors. When you all are legislating things from this board, and it's been questionable and controversial. Even our last temporary executive officer wasn't convinced that this JPA was really designed to legislate, designed to do a lot of things, but legislating is still controversial.
We've already had that looked at by legal professionals, so calling that into question.
Okay, I'm not here to argue. If you want to
No,
know
I'm
why I made the motion.
You
Otherwise,
just made a comment
we're
that
gonna-
isn't true, so
I
just wanted
said
to point that
some
out.
people disagree. So I don't know. Legal professionals often disagree as well. But I'll leave
as
that out of it, Aaron.
We have
if you let
that
me,
called in front of
This
the
is
public to
why-
do that.
I'm concerned about our participation in this body. I will finish by saying that I represent my constituents in the unincorporated areas, and some of the legislation that happens by this board continuing to legislate, that creates controversy amongst some of the constituencies of the county. We're going to have a discussion. I hope we're going to, we gave staff direction to agendize one in the fall. And I'll stop so that you can continue.
Thank you. I appreciate the context. All right, what's the will of the group? I had programmed a 10-minute break from 1:50 to 2 in hopes of getting people up and moving around and things a little bit. Do you want to take that break for a quick 5 or 10 minutes, or do you want to plow on into mission?
Does everybody want to take a break?
I'm easy either way. With my apologies, I'm going to have to leave about 10 minutes after 3. So
Plow on. All righty. So if you can go to my slide deck real quick and pull up, there was a slide right after that landing slide. So we want to develop a mission statement for the organization. Right after that thank you slide. Yep. There we go. So we want to develop a mission statement for the organization. And a mission statement tells the world what you do, how you do it, and why you do it, right? And depending on your philosophy about governance and leadership, you either start with why or you start with what. One of the things in traditional business-oriented strategic planning is you're typically looking at a particular time horizon for your mission or for your vision. And you're looking at what is it that we think we're doing in that time horizon. As a governmental agency, it's a little bit different. You have a permanent mission. As long as you exist, you are serving the public doing certain things, right? And it isn't a profit goal or anything like that that's driving you. It's a service goal typically, or a public protection goal. So we pulled up some examples of mission statements from other solid waste JPAs to give you a sense of how they wrestle with some of the issues in defining their scope. So at one end of the spectrum, you have the South Bayside Waste Management Authority in San Mateo County that has a zero waste goal, has solid waste powers, has enforcement powers for its member agencies, 12 of them. And their mission is to serve as a community and industry leader to support the member agency's public health, safety, economic, climate action plan, and zero waste priorities by providing innovative programs that flexibly and cost-effectively drive waste reduction, reuse, recycling, and composting through education, technical assistance, infrastructure, and enforcement. They picked each one of those words very carefully. They decided they wanted to take on enforcement. They decided that they weren't going to take on their own zero waste goal, but they were going to support the zero waste goals that some of their member agencies had taken on. They own facilities. They talk about the cost effectiveness of provision of those services that they provide. So you can see how they really wrestled with all the bits and pieces of what they do and how they do it and tried to convey that in their mission. You can also take a look at the Monterey Regional Waste Management District in Monterey County. This is the peninsula communities, and theirs is a little bit of a different frame. They say their mission is to turn waste into resources in the most cost-effective and environmentally sound manner to benefit the community. They don't adopt policy, they don't do enforcement. They coordinate through education, they coordinate through facilities that they own and operate, and they have a very different frame. They also are one of the most cost-effective, highest diversion, publicly owned facilities in the state. So that's a different framework for you. So you can see how each of these other solid waste related entities has wrestled with who are we and what do we do and why do we do it. If you can go to the next slide. Thank you. So we've suggested from the words that we heard from all of you in our interviews with you, 5 different potential starting point mission statements. We had to give you a little bit of a head start, use your own words, but if we hadn't given you the head start, we'd be spending 4 hours just coming up with this. So we gave a range of different frameworks for thinking about it. We included different features in each of these in terms of what the scope and the limitations of the scope of the authority are. So the very first one that we suggested, I think if I was sitting there in 1989 at the time that you were founded and created the regional agency, I think people would have said that you were trying to provide efficient coordination and liability diffusion to the member agencies specific to California waste regulations. I think it was a very practical liability type of thing at that point. I think you've grown from that, but I think that was a starting point. I heard a number of you really lean on policy and enforcement as a mechanism for driving cost efficiency in reducing waste as opposed to recycling. So the second one is more about the use of coordinated policy and enforcement to meet the mission of reducing waste. Some of you really don't want that, but some of you said that that was a tool for that cost efficiency. The next one, a number of you talked about continuous improvement. Let's keep looking at things and finding a way to practically make steps forward. So we included that, continuously improve the waste management practices in the county through coordinated policies, programs, and community education. We specifically didn't put enforcement in that one. And the coordinated policies might not be policies that are adopted through the IWMA, but maybe there are policies that are model policies that you could each individually choose to join into or not. But the idea there is that it's the coordination. Next one, provide coordinated efforts to comply with state waste and recycling policy on behalf of member agencies through practical, cost-effective programs, education, and technical support. So that one leans again on the coordinative benefits, takes policy away, takes enforcement away, and talks about community education, technical support, sort of going back and supporting the community as opposed to a more regulatory stance. And then we heard from almost all of you the word practical. And so I felt like it needed to find its way in here somehow. Practical and cost-effective waste management solutions in furtherance of state regulatory requirements. Some of you said, do what the state requires us to do, but let's not go further than that. And so this may be a framework for thinking about that. So we've given you 5 potential starting points. What would be helpful for us is if we could have a discussion amongst you about some of those words and some of those features and try and hone in on which one of these might be a starting point. And then we'll put that up on the chart there, and we'll start with little sticky notes, playing with words. Let's change this word for this word. And you can start picking and choosing from amongst these to assemble a mission that really makes sense to you guys in terms of how far or how narrow it goes. Any questions on that before we open the discussion? All right. Anybody want to wade in with a particular mission statement starting point that they like, or features of some of these that they like or don't like?
Item 4 is really where Paso Robles really wants to be, by that coordinated effort. That's bottom line for us.
Yeah, I think I look back and I've read and reread the JPA and why this organization was created. And to me, the primary thing is the fourth bullet you have there, and to some degree, the first bullet you have there. And I think that, you know, those are the key things, because we might have disagreements about where we go, how we pursue things, and to what extent we ought to do certain things. But those are the primary purposes that we came together as cities and the county, is to comply, is to achieve compliance with the state laws that would be very inefficient for us to all try to achieve compliance with on our own.
Right. You up one slide.
So very similar to what Mr. Hammond said in terms of how Paso perceived it, but I think that number one, you know, part of getting to the fourth bullet is doing what it says in the first one.
So maybe a way of kind of blending those two concepts.
Yeah, and that first one sounds a little bit legalistic, but I do understand one of the primary purposes also was to, you know, mitigate all of us having to deal with state law on its own, as well as mitigate our liability for potential failure to do so.
Okay.
So I would weigh in that what we want to do is cost effectively manage waste in the entirety of SLO County in compliance with state mandates through policy, ordinance, technical support, and education.
You didn't say enforcement.
That's ordinance.
Okay, you're including enforcement with policy making.
Policy could be ordinance. If we just put policy in there, that would allow the flexibility of this agency to continue with the ordinances that have been successful.
Okay.
And that, you know, that's key. That has benefit. There's, to me, the benefits, cost effectiveness comes from a regional approach to this. Our county is not so big that we should be doing this in anything less than a countywide approach. You know, it would be nice to think we could educate our communities to a point of compliance with state mandates. But I think you look at the COVID pandemic and response to it, and you'll see that that's not always a feasible way in which to achieve public policy goals for a region. And so, you know, yes, education, absolutely. It's been a hallmark of this agency. Mm-hmm. Technical support's been a hallmark of this agency. And cooperation with business community has been a hallmark of this agency. And from that comes policy, which has included ordinance. And that's done a fantastic job to date. And so I think we need to organize our vision around the goal of successful solid waste management, which we've been doing for 25 years or however long the JPA has been in place, and proceed. You know, policy on a less than countywide basis, including ordinance at a less than countywide basis, leads to, I think, inefficiencies not only in the governance of it, but also in the compliance side with whatever businesses and individuals have to do. So
it sounds like a lot of the words that you used are resident in 4, but you added the policy overlay to that.
We need to retain, however we want to phrase it. Policy, to me, when you say policy, that includes the ability to do ordinance. And there's no doubt we have the legal authority.
Right.
That's beyond dispute at this point. You know, those may, you know, some may want to raise that as a confusing red herring, but we have the authority to do it, and we should use it wisely. We should use it with as much consensus as we can. But, you know, solving public policy problems sometimes requires ordinance, and it's to the benefit of the entirety of the system to be able to do that.
Okay.
I have a comment, if I might.
Mm-hmm, please.
I just want to say, and I think this is where you're going to find disagreement amongst us. Maybe I'm the only one, but that what Supervisor Gibson just spoke about is something that I think there's complete disagreement about. I believe that structurally, when we look at why we came together and the liability diffusion and then member agencies, practical, cost-effective programs, education, technical support, and efficiencies. That's all great. But what I see happening amongst my constituents, and I think some of the others in this room will agree with their constituents as well, the city jurisdictions or the county jurisdictions or the CSDs or particular different governments, if they are enacting or legislating and enforcing ordinances, then at least their constituents have a say. They've elected those people or in that jurisdiction. But this kind of a body, a JPA made up in this way, when you see controversial and not really accept, it's not just everybody's accepting some of the legislation that's coming out of this body. In fact, it is controversial in a lot of places of the county. And as an elected official in the unincorporated area, people say, what's going on here? I elected you. And I'm being so outnumbered on the makeup, on the particular makeup. The makeup works well, I think, of this body for the things that we see in bullet number 4, but not for legislating across the entire county. And it's going to create controversy, and it's going to continue to create controversy. I feel like my job is to speak up for my constituency, and if some of the cities want to ban or do or change, do it in your own city council and let the Board of Supervisors legislate or create policy through ordinances for the unincorporated areas. I think it should be done that way.
So
that's where we disagree.
I really appreciate the nuance of that clarification. One of the things I heard during the interviews was maybe we do policy to the extent that it's required by state law.
Absolutely, we all have to follow.
And then
exactly, yes.
maybe enforcement happens at each of our agencies or with the permission of each of our agencies, and that might be a way of putting some guardrails up around these concerns.
Exactly.
I don't know if that works for others. It was suggested during the
expand that, because what does that mean? With state law, we have diversion rates that are mandated. How we get to those diversion rates are not necessarily mandated when it comes to certain items like plastics.
You actually don't anymore have any state law that mandates jurisdictional diversion rate. SB 1016 in 2008 eliminated that, and what it does is mandates that you perform programs and perform them at a good faith effort. 1383 furthers that and puts all these minimum program standards in around organics. So to the point of plastics, you have a goal statement to increase recycling and reduce disposal, but it isn't required through state law that you adopt a single-use ban or a polystyrene ban or something like that. So in that framework, then it would be, does each agency want to do this? Do we adopt a model that each agency could bring and consider, or is it really just grassroots from each agency? And if it works, and maybe there's technical assistance from the staff here about what works and what doesn't work, or what others do or something like that to support the agencies, but that it stops somewhere short of you adopting a policy that isn't specifically required by the state.
I won't support anything that's simply just policies for examples instead of policies that are actually implementable. I think having to go city by city to get these things implemented, again, puts everybody on a vastly different curve of being able to achieve the actual, reality of reducing that material. And when we talk about plastics, we've all talked about it as a board, this is a huge environmental issue. This is not about people debating the ideology of whether or not you want to put in ordinances or not. The point is to get rid of the actual toxic substance. And we've continually debated that on an ideological standpoint.
Then Aaron, work at the state level to make that a mandate. You get it? That's where you need to go. And not come through this agency to demand and make other city agencies do what you feel is appropriate.
Well, again, as you guys represent your constituents, I represent my constituents.
Agreed.
And on this board, so
That's
that's what I'm doing.
You guys can do what you want, but don't make past robles comply with your feelings about a certain material. Until it becomes an issue from the state mandate level, I think past robles will do what it needs to do in its best interest, kind of with the county as well. So that's really where the rub is, Ben, is that we're using this agent. It's evolved into a vehicle to make other agencies comply. And that's really where.
It's an agency to reduce waste. That's literally what we are set up to do.
I think
Waste
though,
reduction.
he just said something that frankly astounded me because I've been operating under an erroneous assumption. Then you're saying that a fixed percentage diversion rate is no longer baked in the pie. Okay, because my presumption all along is, we exist as an agency to comply with state law, and a big portion of that is meet diversion rate requirements.
Meet diversion
And
program
therefore,
requirements.
that's one of the reasons I'm willing to consider some of these things. So I look at, okay, that doing some of these actions would reduce our or increase our diversion rate by reducing waste flowing to landfills. But you're saying now under 1380, under whatever the previous bill was, and now under 1383, you're going to have a program for reducing this, that, or the other thing. But and there's certain minimum requirements, which might include the things that some of us don't agree with policy-wise.
Mm-hmm.
But we wouldn't have. We would be able to adopt things that meet that individually within a city. We could say, okay, we're going to ban this, and they're not, et cetera. But I do want to comment a little bit on Councilmember Hammond, because I think we're mostly in agreement. But one of the reasons that I was open to the styrofoam thing is that Atascadero didn't want to be in the styrofoam police business. Didn't want to be in the enforcement business. We didn't have a particular objection to styrofoam, at least when it came to certain basic things like the reusable cups and the plates and that kind of thing. But we were clearly not wanting to spend our city resources and time on being the styrofoam police. And so we thought it was better that the IWMA as a regional body in enhancing diversion rates, et cetera, would be better placed to, sorry to put the work on Patty, but better place to do that on our behalf. So that's kind of a little disagreement on approach, but that was based substantially on the fact that assuming we as an agency, an IWMA, had to meet diversion rates and had to continually improve our diversion rates.
What I would say is it's gotten harder because it's not just hit a number and feather back on programming if you're exceeding your number. It's do every one of those 45 programs that are in your SRRE list and demonstrate each year that you're doing them a little better than you did them last year. And so they've really raised the bar from the theory that they had when AB 939 was passed, which is we're going to set a goal, you're going to hit that goal, and you're going to decide how you get there. Now they're saying, here are the minimum program standards, and if you don't do all of your 45 programs, we're going to say you're not in good faith, even if your numbers look really great. I've had clients that have gotten on compliance orders and they're exceeding the numerical targets. They just didn't operate the program.
Yeah, that sounds like a state way of looking at it.
It is. It's a lot of what they've gone to that in the Water Control Resources Board. They've gone to that at ARB. They're doing this minimum program standard thing.
Because I do think that what Supervisor Arnold is getting at is I think it's in very political terms, but it's very true, is that you have a body like this that's made up of 7 cities, 5 supervisors, and you can end up having, majority of cities in essence tell the county what's going to happen is affecting their residents in the non-incorporated areas. And that's a valid concern. And to me, one of the things to talk about down the road as part of strategic planning is that we need to change wording in the JPA that in some circumstances, certain actions might require a supermajority, or there are other ideas that could be worked on as how to address some of that legitimate political concern about how the JPA works.
If I might, protection of the rights of the minority is a issue that's been dealt with since the founding of the country. But the question is, are we able at the county level to muster the collective will to solve a problem before the state mandates it? And I guess we could wait around for the state to tell us what to do. But I would like to think that we are smarter and more community-minded and more capable of exercising leadership than to wait for Sacramento to tell us to do what we know is right. For instance, getting rid of expanded polystyrene. And I think that this is what we're hearing in terms of the difference of opinion here is reflective of a lack of community sense that's pervasive in the country, and we're not immune to that. Is there an ability to accept doing things that we'd rather not do for the benefit of the greater good? And that's the essence of government. And so I don't think that this agency is structurally inappropriate or structurally deficient. We've got elected officials here, and you're appointed by your cities. I sit representing 52 or 54,000 people to do what needs to be done. And it's very much like the mask wearing thing. This has become politicized. I don't want to wear a mask because it's a matter of personal freedom. I want to use expanded polystyrene because it's a matter of personal freedom. Well, there are consequences to those kinds of choices that we need to reconcile. And so rather than, I'm trying to put aside the ideological component of the discussion on this and get to the practical matter, which this agency has done a very good job with over the years.
Through education.
And ordinance.
Exactly. That's point, Bruce, that through education and telling providers of styrofoam that it's not the best thing to use, start working for something else.
Right.
It's already happening.
Right.
That's good. That's what we were here for, in my opinion, on number 4, to educate.
But take batteries.
But not the demand through ordinance and policy that you will do this.
Well, except we have gotten it through ordinance as well.
And
it's not one or other.
Yeah, let me just offer you the example. We knew that batteries shouldn't be going into landfills. In fact, they were banned from landfills, and we passed an ordinance. We educated the retailers that have to take them back. We were successful, as I think we will continue to find a funding source that, at least in a transition, made it no cost to them. And we've widely established through ordinance the recycling of batteries, the return of sharps, the mercury thermostats, the latex paint, all of these things. Now, we hit the plastic bag ordinance, and we got into a discussion that was pure ideology, because in fact, in other places, single-use plastic bags have been banned, and the world didn't come to an end. And remember how we did that ordinance, John, whether one voted for it, against it. It is the nature of our democratic system that the minority should reasonably accept the will of the majority if the process has been good. And in that plastic bag ban ordinance, I think the process was good. And we gave an adequate time of transition. And I would submit that a year into it or 2 years into it, we had 0 complaints about it. So things get harder as our community sense splinters more. But I think the basic structure of this organization is not only good, but it's really important. And especially in these times when we're going to have horrible budget situations, it's necessary for us to stand up and say we're doing good governance on this matter. So can we work out the way in which this works better? Maybe. But our ability, and Charles pointed out, Tascadero doesn't want to enforce on styrene. That's the benefit of going regional on this. And again, we're not so big as to make that, to me, an untractable problem. So that's where my vision of this organization comes, is that we use the tools that we have been using, work on how we present those tools and how we educate the public as to the importance of those tools and those results. And I think we can continue to be a state leader. I really do.
One of the things that's interesting in the description that you just gave, when you talk about the ordinances that you passed at the beginning, before the plastic bag ban, you guys really were leaders, and people came here to the library in San Luis for workshops from all over the state to learn about how you guys were doing those programs, because it was unique. You weren't just banning it. You were creating a network that was mutually beneficial for the user of the product and the business that was selling the product. And you did it in a very San Luis Obispo way.
And yet at the same time, at the hearing to pass that ordinance, we heard that people had a God-given right to use single-use plastic bags. And we heard that this country has fought wars for the personal freedom to be able to use single-use plastic bags. Now, that line was delivered to a World War II veteran who was sitting directly to my right, who said, don't insult me about that, essentially. Don't trivialize this on that matter. And that's where education comes in. And that's where a sense of this body, if it were working together, representing the diversity that we do, can have, as we have had, really strong results and strong leadership.
Well, I guess I agree with that. Where I was going was, is there something from those early ordinances that I think there was widespread support about in the way that it was done that informs the values of the organization or informs the mission of the organization to reconcile this issue going forward? Is there some limit on the policy? Is there some way in which we do the policy work that allows folks to get comfortable staying together? And I appreciate that, there's this dynamic of, are we going to legislate amongst those that want to stay, or are we going to be able to have this broader coordinated benefit, but maybe not the same impact through policy? I mean, that sounds like the tension that is set up here. Is it going to be the larger group with a smaller scope, or a smaller group with a broader scope?
Based on all of my experience in this field, we can't educate our way out of the problems that have been created. So there has to be a policy component to it. And I haven't heard all I've heard from those that are opposed to that is they don't want the ability to write ordinances anymore, unless it's directly related to state. That there's no wiggle room there.
I can speak a little more to that. I'm not opposed to any one of our agencies creating ordinances.
Well, they can do that already.
Aaron, that's the problem we're having is I didn't interrupt you, so let me finish. Each one of our agencies were elected to a body, and if your constituents want whatever they want, I would 100% support you doing that. It's not ideological. It is the fact that I represent a group of citizens that sometimes feel disenfranchised because there's a body that they're really not all that familiar with that's meeting, and all of a sudden they find themselves legislated, and then it kind of comes out of nowhere. And I know we try really hard to educate people the fact that the IWMA is here and what we do and so forth and so on. But I just think that create any ordinances you want, create them in your bodies amongst the people you represent. And as these ideas spread and education spreads, everybody comes along. I wasn't elected on a platform to say, here I am, and I'm going to tell you what I think you should be doing and what's best for you. I'm trying to represent folks and lead them along. And we know that life gets complicated, it gets busy, a lot of things, it gets expensive, and people they're thinking about different things all the time. There are a lot of balls up in the air. I think that at the local level, the body you are representing, all of us in this room, we're more in touch with what our constituents are thinking about at that moment and wanting us to do at that moment. And I think that's the appropriate place to create the ordinances.
May I ask you a question?
Sure.
There are other regional boards as well in this county.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel that way about those other regional boards?
It's a little different. Most of those bodies were created in the same light, I think, to create efficiency. So if you're talking about SLOCOG, yes, where are we going to spend the money that comes into this area regionally so we get more bang for the buck? If you're talking about the Air Pollution Control District, that's another, that creates controversy when they legislate, when they create regulation. Otherwise, when they're creating programs and educating and they actually do enforce by state mandate, pollutants and things like that, but they have their controversial
everything's controversial.
Everything's controversial, but I'm just saying
supervisors are controversial. I mean, we all are.
Regulation and ordinances, I think, are I feel like if I'm representing my constituents, I'm just going to say, let's do it. The constituents in the unincorporated areas that I represent, they don't even know any.
I understand what you're
saying. They didn't
saying.
vote for you. Whatever your interests are and what you're trying to do, they don't know that. They're looking at me like, So I believe that I think I've said everything. That we should be, as an agency, we should be, if we're going to legislate and regulate and enforce, that can be done agency by agency to better represent our constituency.
Could I just offer, by way of example, the Alameda County Waste Management Authority, which was created by a voter initiative in Alameda County over all 16 cities and 2 special districts, was dealing with exactly this issue back in 2008 to 2010. They were implementing their mandatory recycling ordinance. And Oakland, because of its scale and urban nature, and then some of the conservative East County communities said, we're not ready for mandatory recycling. We're not ready for mandatory organics. We need to figure out a way for this agency to adopt this policy, this ordinance, to allow that agency to enforce it, but to have each agency opt in at the appropriate time. Ultimately, they ended up with an opt-out system, not an opt-in system, but 3 cities, 1 special district opted out for the first 2 years of the program. Ultimately, Oakland came on board once it got its new franchise and things were programmed right. And the East County cities, the last one came on board last year. So it phased things over a longer period of time, but it gave this local control to each agency's city council or board of soups or board of directors to say, is this policy that's been adopted something I want to happen in my community? Is that, I realize it sub-optimizes for both perspectives, but is that something that would give you some greater comfort?
I think it's what I'm talking about. You then have your elected officials or your communities making decisions rather than having the decisions made by a larger body of people that they did not elect.
Does that obstruct your goal too much, Aaron?
I think there's this convoluted conversation around us, this agency forcing people to do things that they don't want to do, but that's the whole point of regulation, no matter where it's coming down from. Even for a city, just because an individual is elected and they vote for something, even that majority, they don't represent every single person in that city. So you could use that same argument for those that are in the minority. And I think going to this lowest common denominator of trying to appease everybody, even the minority opinion, goes counter to the whole democratic process. So this whole idea of opting in and opting out, cities can create their own ordinances around this as is. Mm-hmm. It's not like they have to look to this agency to do it.
That's my point.
But we are a waste management authority. To achieve certain goals, we have also have our own understanding that we can use ordinances to get to those end goals.
And
there seems to be a disagreement that we want to be able to create legislation at all at this level, which that's where I disagree. What you're saying is it's still kind of a model ordinance program, only people can opt in or opt out at the onset, which I think is still too light for my liking. But
yeah, from my perspective, I'm going to take my mask off so I can be heard a little better. From my perspective, it's really about what's cost effective. The people that I represent, all they care about is why did my rate go up? Mm-hmm. What's the basis of that? Why do I have to do this? Most people, I believe, do want to do the right thing with respect to waste. In Morro Bay, for sure, we work very hard to do that. And I think our power is an agency that works together to create just the administration of this stuff, which is so complex. I think the only responsible thing from a cost standpoint is to stick together. Now, we're going to have disagreements about the ordinance and what we actually need to do. Yes, probably always. But I think we owe it to our constituents in this county, and it is a small county, to stick together, surely from a cost-effective standpoint. Because this, I don't believe your numbers up there. I believe implementation of 1383 is going to cost way more than what you've projected, even if we stay together. I mean, this could be a real expensive thing for this county. And I think as an agency, we need to stick together and deal with it, do the best we can to keep it cost effective for our customers.
I think we still have that question of how do we stay together if we have these vastly different ideas of what we think this agency is meant to do.
Yeah.
We
So
can have different ideas.
my sense of the discussion is there was a good deal of consensus around the general framework of 4, and that the question marks are around extent of policy and extent of enforcement. Is that fair?
That's right.
Anyone disagree with that?
So if we don't enforce, who's going to enforce?
Well, that's an interesting, and it gets into the governance system and it gets into the administrative system, but there are a lot of options out there about how you do it. One approach that's being discussed pretty widely throughout the state is leaning on county environmental health to do inspections and enforcement around a good number of the things that are in 1383. Environmental health officers are already visiting those food service establishments for other reasons. There's benefits in carpooling that. And they've got the technical expertise to do that work. And so perhaps if the enforcement were done in that way or coordinated in that way, that would have one set of parameters around it and set of bureaucracy around it. If on the other hand, as some solid waste JPAs have done, you brought in a code enforcement person to your own agency that had the ability to go out and write citations and run through the administrative citation process, that would be a different architecture, right? And it would be an employee you would have here, and you'd have to set up contracts with administrative law judges to review these things. And so it's a little bit down into the weeds of the strategic plan that we'll do about how you would go about organizing that, who would take responsibility for what. One of the key questions is, are you all going into this together or are you going separately? Because if you're going separately, then the answer is you're probably going to have to hire somebody down in Morro Bay to do it. You're going to have to hire somebody in Grover Beach to do it. It really has that kind of dynamic.
So is the cost of enforcement figured into your budget for, and how did you figure it? What's the basis for that?
Using the staffing salary schedules from each of your agencies for your code enforcement officers times the number of hours that we assume would be needed based on the demand.
So part of the staffing you showed between 5 and 7 staff, I think. So that includes enforcement?
Mm-hmm.
If you look at vision statement, you know, I guess I have a limited patience in debating vision statements because they get constructed, they get published, and we never look at them again.
Yeah. Except
when it's convenient. So yeah, let's take bullet number 4 as the vision statement. That doesn't speak to how we accomplish these things.
Exactly. So let's go to values next, because that's the how.
Well, it's values, it's procedures, it's authorities, it's all the other structure of the JPA, which has its authorities. So that's a fine vision statement. You know, practical, cost-effective, education, technical support, but we provide coordinated efforts. That doesn't speak to whether we legislate or don't legislate.
Yeah, as I said, I think the open items are policy and enforcement.
That's not a matter potentially for the vision statement. We don't have to decide that for the vision statement.
I think it would be good for you guys to decide in your mission statement, because the mission statement is the scope of the authority. I think it would be good for you guys to decide this issue as part of your mission statement. What is the extent of policy? Now, there's going to be a lot of nuance and administration down to how all of that works. But one of the big questions that I think is out there right now is policy and enforcement part of what you guys want this organization to do? And there is no mission statement to tell us right now.
Well, I have to agree with Mr. Gibson on, I mean, I think number 4 by itself is simple. It covers the bases. I would kind of disagree in the sense that the authorities of the JPA are in the JPA.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
They're not in a vision statement. They're not in a values statement. They're in the JPA. And so I think, and I like him I've spent in other organizations hours where people are debating every word of the mission statement that's going to go on the shelf and they're not going to look at it again. So I like to keep them simple. You know, one simple coherent sentence is great instead of, you usually see a run-on paragraph. So I mean, I like going with bullet 4 and keep it simple. Because we're going to argue about policy and how you get there.
Mhm.
That's the whole point of a group of elected officials. We represent different opinions. We're going to sit and argue. That's fine.
Okay. Any differences? All right. Well, we're about 5 minutes behind, but that's okay. Do you want to break now?
Well, do we want to take a vote on putting number 4 in, or?
Do we want to do that as a vote? I was reading consensus and looking for objections and didn't hear any.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I couldn't hear you, so.
Sorry.
Strand?
One of the words I like up there is, in the first one, is liability diffusion. And while we discuss reducing costs, I refer to our council back here in the corner as to, is the word liability in this mission statement have any effect?
No, it would not have any effect one way or another.
Okay, leave it out. Thank you.
Okay.
I'd like to say something really corny, but I feel really compelled to say it. And that is, the earth is dying, we're killing it. I think if we're going to put something in a mission statement, we ought to say something about universal whatever. Why are we all sitting around with these masks on? Doesn't it occur to you why we got mixed up in a pandemic? And why the ocean is going to be almost 100% plastic particles because of the crap we're throwing in it? If you want to have a mission statement, go ahead and make one. But frankly, I'm pretty pessimistic about the whole thing.
So you want to see something more aspirational than coordinated efforts to comply with state policy?
Yes, something that would contribute to the universal attempt to control trash and climate warming and everything else that goes along with our treatment of the planet, which is what we've been doing.
So would you like to see something like reducing the impacts of waste in the county, or continuously improving waste management practices added?
I like 3. It covers education, it covers policies, programs, policies meaning regulations.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you're looking for enforcement, I don't think we have to beat it to death. But any number of these, I agree with my fellow members that once this thing is printed, it'll go on the shelf.
Anybody object to adding one of the more aspirational pieces like continuous improvement of waste management practices to reflect the broader goal?
No, I don't agree with that. Again, the mission statement should be clear and concise and not on and on and on, really. As close as concise as, I think bullet point 4 really is what I would suggest.
Okay. Any other questions before we break or suggestions? Why don't we take a 10-minute break and regroup at 3 o'clock?
You need to stand up.
What's that?
Yeah.
Yes.
That was our normal time.
Yeah. It was the first long time.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
I know. I hate
and then I got here.
Start to see everyone's face expressions.
I know. Keitha, you've lived here in this county your whole life too, and I think about this all the time in the back roads of our county. There's so many back roads of our county. I think all my adult life, for as long as I've been paying attention, there have been signs posted here and there about the legal visitor and the $1,000 fine. There's always so much stuff that lies throughout. It's right next to it, or a mattress, or so I always think about that. We can regulate all we want, but it's more about education and having the money to clean it up after whatever percentage is. This is pay attention. And
personal responsibility prevails.
And if it just doesn't, most, I don't think we'll ever get 100% of that.
And get away with it?
No.
Probably not, no.
But yeah, but I do think that people start to get resentful. Legislative
See, when we first, I
further
think when all of us went on
without
this thing,
their,
we were with
basically
William.
without a direct line for
Laurel.
And I mean, we went to the meetings and we got
Those are the
cookies
people
and
that
he said, well, I did
kind
this
of
and I did
at the
that.
right pace.
What do you think? And I said,
Things
okay,
going.
right. Well, who knew? I mean, who knew? But he was the only one that knew anything about waste. You know. So I'm sorry,
It's true. We didn't know.
I'm just so mad. I just don't get it.
I know, and you know, they talk to me.
Well,
You do education.
you'd be the only one.
Yeah.
But a lot of.
I sent a note.
It's almost like.
Yep. Hi, sorry to interrupt, but you guys are muted in the room and we can't hear you.
Saying it's not the audio.
Looks like we're unmuted. Can you hear us now?
Okay, yes, you're unmuted now. Thank you.
Okay. We're asking if there's any public comment at this point in the meeting.
Okay, so if anybody has public comment, you can raise your hand. Looks like I already have one hand raised. Okay, Janine, you should be able to unmute yourself. And I will share my screen. And are you ready, Janine?
I am, thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted, as I listened to the comments about the angst of the polystyrene ordinance, I had to reflect about 5 years ago when we were working on North County, getting constituent support for that area that, and this is Arnold and Hammond's districts. I polled about 10 wineries and 10 high-end restaurants in your area. And each one, especially the wineries, were just aghast that I even had called about it and said if they had never used polystyrene as a packing service, and they certainly would not use polystyrene in their food part. The same with the restaurants. They were, they said their patrons would never accept to take home a takeout box, for instance, in a foam with polystyrene foam. So I don't believe you are saying that your constituents represent all of that, all of your statements. And you have a lot of wealth up there in the winery department. And those people that come and they're tourists that come to visit your area, and they would see polystyrene foam being used in those expensive places wouldn't be acceptable. Okay, that's it. Getting interrupted there.
Okay, thank you. And do I have any other public comment? If you're on the phone, you wish to make public comment, you just need to hit *9. Okay, that is everything for public comment.
All right, let's bring it back and go to the next step.
All righty. So typically as you do these things, your mission tells your audience, tells your staff, tells your stakeholders, tells folks that work with you what you do. Your values tell your staff how you as a governing body want them to do those things, how you want them to interact with your stakeholders or constituents or partners or other staff members in the performance of their duties. So in our interviews with all of you, we asked you about what you think some organizational values should be for the IWMA. And the 18 words or phrases that are up here are things that more than one of you repeated, or that one of you said and exists in one of your jurisdiction's organizational values. So it's sort of echoed through your member agencies. Now there are 18 phrases, words up here that might mean different things to different people. And so as we talk about them, we should talk about what sentence comes behind them or what you intend by them. For example, a couple of you talked about business friendly. And as I dug in with you about that, some of you meant when we pass laws on that affect businesses, we send technical assistance and education out to support them in the implementation of those things. Others of you meant we do not add regulation to businesses. And so business friendly had a different intention. And so it's good to make sure that as we talk about our values, we're clear. I also noted, and it isn't unusual in a public agency, but I noted that you had a high number of repeating things around sort of ethics issues. Ethical, honesty, integrity, accountability, professionalism. You know, there are a number of things that sort of circle around the same themes. So it would be a little bit awkward to have your 5 guiding values or 7 guiding values and 4 of them speak to ethical issues, right? So if we find in consolidating and coming up with this that there's a bunch of repetition around those, we may have a discussion about, okay, there's 3 words here. How do we come together on something that really conveys what we mean? So what I want to do is have maybe a 10 to 15 minute discussion of what you guys think of these various values and whether in particular you think there are some that just don't make sense. Doesn't really, not meaningful enough, doesn't apply to us, not our context. And then what I'd like to do is use a dot voting exercise at the end where each of you will get 3 votes for organizational values. We'll tally it up. And the goal is to come up with the top 3 to 7 really. 5 is kind of the sweet spot, but 3 to 7 guiding principles, guiding values. And then we'll go back, try and flesh those out to articulate what we think you meant by that and bring it back to you to say, okay, in a more full-fleshed version, is this what you agree to? So with that, I'll open it up to you, all of you, for any input on, are there any of these words that you just feel super strongly about for some reason, or that you want to clarify what's intended by it, or that you just think it has no place?
I just wasn't sure what neutral was referring to.
So there was a concern about the board taking an advocacy role and wanted to see the board be more neutral and not taking advocacy positions. There was also somebody that suggested environmental leadership on the other end of that spectrum.
So I would feel strongly about removing neutral from a value standpoint. That's just such an ambiguous term. Doesn't seem like a very guiding principle at all.
Isn't cost effectiveness assumed?
Not necessarily. I mean, in government, we do a lot of things to protect the public health and safety that are not at all cost effective. And so in governmental agencies, I like to make sure that that really is a guiding value, maybe over or in addition to some of these other things.
Especially when we regulate other people's behavior, we need to consider the cost effectiveness on them, not just the cost effectiveness on us.
Right.
And I think probably the ethical, transparent, honesty, integrity, probably a lot of those were my words, based on the, you know, the issues from the previous administration. So I imagine some of those could probably be all
Folded
wrapped
into
into
one.
maybe just transparency or something like that.
Well, that's a rich vein to mine, actually, because we do have a number of words up here, and it wasn't just you that suggested those. I heard one of those words from, I think, all of you in the discussion. All of you brought up some angle on that. And so what do you think? What's the right word to convey what y'all mean collectively when you're talking about these ethics issues? How do you think about that? Is it transparency? Is it accountability?
We repeat transparency quite often, especially, you know, post DA investigation. So
I think you see so many of those words, probably more than you'd normally see in an exercise like this because of what we went through.
Right.
2 years ago. So a lot of those things were more top of mind than they maybe would have been for another entity at another point in time.
Which is why I don't want to end up with 4 of them on your list. I don't want to overreact. Transparency was also one, Aaron, that I saw pretty consistently in the values statements from the member organizations. I don't think any of the organizations that had a value statement missed transparency. So that one may resonate best.
Yeah.
How about environmental leadership, stewardship? How do you rationalize those two?
Isn't that what this organization does? Isn't this what we're about, is environmental leadership?
Well, when I see stewardship, though, I think, again, given where we were, what registered in my mind initially was financial stewardship, stewardship of public resources, that sort of thing. You know, in other words, in my mind, I wasn't attaching an environmental prefix to that. It was
Well, you can have all of those combined.
Right.
Sure.
I mean, waste reduction, no matter what, it is still environmental stewardship. You're keeping things out of a hole in the ground, basically, or in the environment.
Well, and I heard stewardship, including the environmental factor, from a more conservative audience. And so it was interesting to see the connection to taxpayer stewardship, environmental stewardship, sort of the broader thing where maybe environmental leadership would be a step further than that person was comfortable going. And so, you know, as among those, that may be a better fit.
That one feels like to me one of those ones that can be all encompassing, that we all agree on based on all the points that it covers.
Right. Let's cover a couple of other ones. How about how your staff interacts with people? Professionalism, responsiveness, stewardship, or service, efficiency, competence, commitment. Any feelings about sort of how you face the outside world and what those guiding values and principles are?
I agree with everything on the right-hand side of that list. I mean, most important to me is community education, though. That's really how, in my opinion, we should change people's thoughts about the environment. Cost effectiveness, we're using tax dollars, right? So you said a comment earlier that, you know, staff is free. They're not free. Somebody's paying for our staff, and that's through our tax dollars. So service, stewardship, responsiveness, all about that with regard to our staff and responding to the public and what we are there for, I think are really, really important. Of course, professional, without question, you need to have professionalism. Collaboration with the city, again, same thing, that we are in this together because we have value of being a member of IWMA.
Do you see it as collaboration with the city, or do you see it as service to the city?
Both, I think, because again, they're the experts. They're going to collaborate with our staff to make sure that we're doing the right things. That's the value that I see in being here.
One of the things that I think JPAs, not just solid waste JPAs, transit, stormwater, you name it, have gotten away from a sense of we're serving our members, and the entrepreneurialism and here's the value we're providing you seems to have gone to, well, this is what we have to do because it's in our charter or it's in our governing docs or whatever. And sort of curious about how you guys in this community orient towards that. Is it we're checking the boxes and doing what's in the governing docs, or is it really an active outreach and service and value build? Something to think about. Any other stronger feelings, or shall we dot vote?
Say we dot.
All right. So back in the old days, when we could be closer than 6 feet apart, we would have had you get up and mill around and all of that. Morgan has got our list of organizational values, and she's going to note each of your votes. So based on the number of people we have in the room, you each get 3. We'll start with Sheila. Which of these 3 words do you want to vote for?
And this is still the mission statement.
This is your guiding principles and values.
I would go with ethical, professionalism, and
Community education.
Awesome, thank you. Karen?
Okay. I guess I'm going to say transparent. Community education, and how about environmental stewardship?
Thank you.
I thought this was going to be a secret ballot. But,
That's why you always want to be the last one up on the board with your dots, right?
It's not jury duty. It's not jury duty.
Cost effectiveness, transparency, collaboration.
Awesome, thank you. Aaron?
I'll do transparency, community education, and stewardship.
Awesome, thank you.
Community education, collaboration, and integrity.
Great.
I'm community education, efficiency, and professionalism.
Thank you. Sean?
Basically, the educational part of it.
Community education.
Collaboration, again, with the city and the agency, working with the IWMA. And I put the two together, service, cost-efficient service. In other words, it's service is what we do. All cities provide service. It's cost-efficient service that I think should be more of a keyword here than just service.
He ripped his dot in half and put it on two.
Yeah.
That's okay, we'll let you do that this time.
Say transparent, professionalism, and community education.
Professionalism, transparent, stewardship.
Cool. It looks like there's 4 pretty clear ones. Community education, transparency, professionalism, stewardship. Cost effectiveness is the next vote getter, so we could make that our 5th if people felt strongly about that. Do we round it out with cost effectiveness or leave that one out?
Yeah.
All right. So stewardship, professionalism, transparency, community education, and cost effectiveness. Awesome. So the last bit of this, let me do a little time check. Wow, we're a little ahead. Last bit of this is about the elements of your vision. And your vision is cast yourself out into the future, 5 years, 10 years, whatever. And what do you want to see this organization being? What do we do? How does the community see us? How does stakeholders see us? Do they? Are we under the radar as we've been and providing this sort of background collaboration? Or is there a more visible role? What issues are we working on? What does the agency itself look like? What are those elements of your vision? And it may be things that are framed very constructively and positively into the future, and it may be a statement of, here's something we're not doing, perhaps. Maybe something we've accomplished by that point, and so we're behind it. Could be the financial audit's over, and you've got some assurances around those things, right? So each of you have a large sticky pad in front of you and a Sharpie. And what I'd like you to do by yourselves is to spend the next 10 to 15 minutes jotting down one element of your vision, one sort of statement on each piece. And you might have 3, you might have 5, I don't know, maybe have thought about this a lot and you get 10. That's fine, but have each one be discrete. What we'll do is then when we wrap that time up, we'll gather these up from you and we'll start to organize them and see where are there common themes in the vision elements amongst you. Start to group those things and talk to you about them and figure out what is that vision out into the future. One of the things that a lot of solid waste agencies do in this visioning exercise is you've got your elements of the vision and then you set some core organizational goal. Achieve zero waste by 2025, you know, something big and audacious. And those vision elements sort of inform what that common theme might be. So as we look at the outer vision elements, if there is a clarifying, unifying theme, we'll roll with it. If it's not, and it's, you know, a vision of how different pieces of the organization work. You know, there may be a piece of the vision that, a pillar of the vision that is governance. There may be a pillar of the vision that is programs. There may be a pillar of the vision that is policy, right? And so we could think about how we organize that based on what you guys come up with. Any questions?
Can you just describe the exercise one more time, please?
Yeah. So it's what you see the organization being or doing 5 or 10 years into the future. So you're sitting there 10 years from now, you're rounding out your board stint, you're going to come off the board and you're feeling great about, we did all of this. We are at this place now.
7 elements.
If you come up with one great one, that's great. If you have 7 ideas that have been bouncing around your head and you want to talk about them, that's great too. But you got to give me at least one.
I have one, I don't know that's great.
Take about 3 more minutes. Looks like almost all of us have transitioned. We can move on. So I started over with Sheila on the value. I'm going to start over here with you all on vision elements. What are some vision elements that you think are important?
Well, thank you for that start. This is deep water, so I'm going to jump in. What I expect the IWMA to be doing in 5 years is have implemented a mechanism of reporting on the state mandates or requirements. I'd like to see a simple system with all the users participating. Number 2, promote public education through simple performance-focused program that allows the public to be a participant and want to help achieve results through feedback and reward. Number 3, improved recycling methods and equipment through research and development, potential IWMA grants to members to buy equipment and to achieve simpler requirements for households and industrial users.
Okay, so in 5 years, I visualize a IWMA that has achieved compliance with 1383 requirements in a cost-effective manner for both the IWMA, our jurisdictions, our residents, and our businesses. And separately, I visualize the SLO IWMA being recognized by our residents and businesses as the easy-to-use, easy-to-access source of information, education, and resources to comply with local programs and state mandates. If you can read them, yeah.
Okay, 4 things basically. And I wouldn't say in 5 years, I'd like to do it tomorrow.
Go for it.
Educator to San Luis Obispo County residents on state mandated policies on behalf of the agency members. Collaborate, inform, work with member agency staff on meeting state mandated policies. Provide cost-efficient, responsive service to member agencies as they need it. And provide value to the taxpayers, bottom line. That's it.
Clear, simple vision. I love it. All right, Brooks, sorry we're skipping you.
All right.
Keith?
I put educate to individual community needs, and I just threw that in because the numbers that I saw, it looks like each community had different areas they could work on. Have access to a technical advisory group, which I think we had at one time, but I haven't seen much since I've been on the board. Measurable waste reduction success. And I am IWMA unity to include the county and cities together.
Keeping it together. Glad somebody mentioned it. Thank you. Aaron?
Well, the overarching one is just reduce solid waste in SLO County. Bigger goals would be a zero waste county by 2030, meaning set that goal. And then provide guidance and assistance to developing circular economies in SLO County.
Yeah, so you took the vision elements all sort of up one level, a little bigger picture.
I went for the bigger vision.
Let me just make sure I'm organizing these. I think that's sort of between those two. All right. What do you got for us, Jeff?
Okay, so
Thank you.
one is that the SLO IWMA has led the state in the most cost-effective implementation of state mandates regarding waste management. And that's it.
Most successful, cost-effective implementation of 1383?
Any law state.
Okay. Nice, thank you. All right, Karen, your turn.
I just went with what people complain to me about the most. Fully functional recycle centers in central locations throughout the county. And then to achieve zero plastics and polystyrene in the county.
Okay. This straddles those. That's two. Okay.
You probably can't read my scribble.
Nope, I can read it just fine. I'm just going to separate them so that I can put them with their friends up here. All right, Sheila, you started us off last time. You get to back clean up now.
Okay, not sure how successful it's going to be. I went beyond 5 years for the first one. Total zero recycling by 2050, including bottles and cans. Number 2, some profitability created by sales of compost, gas energy methods. In other words, we could actually market methods that we have found to be successful, classes, etc. Number 3, programs that fight global warming, education programs that provide college credits.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. So this would be a good time to either take public comment or a break, or public comment and then a break. And then Morgan and I are going to work for 10 or 15 minutes while you guys are on a break to try and get some unifying themes amongst these and see if we can consolidate into a vision.
We should take public comment before we break.
Okay.
Barbara, can you take public comment again?
Sure can. So if anybody has public comment, if you could please raise your hand. Okay, Janine, it looks like you can unmute yourself. And are you ready?
Yes, I am. I didn't actually make my lists because I didn't even think I was going to participate, but I had to chuckle at John Hammond. He wants this to go tomorrow. That's an awesome statement. But we shouldn't wait. As Sheila referred to earlier, we have a planet to protect, and all of this toxic material, particularly plastics, once it's created, it's never going to go away. Its footprint, even if it's broken down into the minute invisible piece, it's still there, and it's being eaten, and we're eating it up the food chain. So the way to deal with it, the way to stop it is just to stop using it, stop allowing it to be sold and used through our grocery stores and restaurants. I liked Aaron. I gave a hoot and a howl for your statement of being zero waste, and let's work on this. And I am firmly believing that every single contact that I've made throughout the county would fully support a strong approach to stopping the plastics that where we can. Thank you.
Are there any others, Barbara?
Sorry, I muted myself. There is no one else that wants to make a comment.
Thank you.
All right, we'll take a break for 15. Yeah, happens every single meeting too.
No, I just muted him. Just so the room knows, I did mute you. So when you guys need to start again, you need to unmute your computer.
waste county by 2030. That's aggressive. The timeline is short. 2050 is a little bit further out. Still is aspirational, but a little bit more time to get there. Different way of framing it, measurable waste reduction success. Could be, for the continuous improvements. Reduce the solid waste in San Luis Obispo County. General, just keep reducing it. Ongoing aspirational goal. Programs that fight global warming, and then achieve zero plastics and zero polystyrene. So, how far do we want to go? What is that sort of center vision? Is it 8 and 8? Is it ongoing continuous improvement? Is it do the best we can to reduce things cost efficiently? How far do we want to take that?
Well, I think cost efficiency is extremely important because, a lot of things you can achieve 60, 70% reductions in something. But the farther you go, the harder it becomes. And you can spend 100 times as much to get rid of that last 10% than you did the first 90%. And you have to, I don't want to have a goal that becomes a driver of, of ultimately bad policy that adversely affects residents or businesses. You just have to be careful. It's one thing to have an aspirational goal. It's another to let that become a driver of policy to the point where you're imposing great cost on individuals and businesses when there might be a more effective way to reduce other kinds of waste much more efficiently.
So you're okay with the zero waste goal, but with a cost effectiveness guardrail?
Yeah, yes. So it's fine to have an aspirational goal to have zero waste in a given category, but it has to be done in a cost-effective manner.
Okay. Right. When the city of Oceanside adopted its zero waste goal, the council really wrestled with, they supported the zero waste aspirational goal, but they wrestled with what you're suggesting, which is not at any cost. We have a community that's, largely senior, largely military. We can't just expect they're going to pay whatever. So, that they set theirs up. They define zero waste as somewhere between 75 and 90% reduction in disposal. They had a cost effectiveness standard. They had check-ins. There are ways of structuring that where you can have the big aspirational thing, but have those check-ins along the way.
Right, and it's a good way of putting it in the sense that, you could figure that, you could achieve this, but everybody'd have a $200 a month, garbage bill. or your business would be, have an untenable garbage bill or something related to it. So maybe that's, in that community that made sense.
So if we put guardrails on it, does anybody disagree with the zero waste as the big, hairy, audacious goal?
I don't disagree with the goal, but to me, there are lots of goals out there that are aspirational. I'm not sure that this should have an aspirational element. For me, it's more about cost and waste reduction. I'm just concerned about goals that are highly aspirational and unlikely to be achieved. In my opinion, I'm just not sure that there should be an aspirational goal.
That's a big policy question. Do you have an aspirational vision in this, or is it much more functional like these other ones? Education, coordination with cities. All of this stuff is sort of nuts and bolts pillar of your strategic plan. Heard you loud and clear, that stuff will be in there. Question is there, and you're saying no, is there some big target to aim for that kind of creates an overarching trajectory for the organization?
Yeah, I guess the one that I stated was that we lead the state in waste reduction.
Mm-hmm.
And who knows what that will land at 5, 10 years from now, but that we be aggressive and we collaborate and do what we can to chip away at that significantly, whatever that means.
Which in itself is an aspirational goal.
It is.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. It's just not as overly. I think zero waste in 10 years or something is overly aspirational.
But I mean,
Yeah.
leading the state is very aspirational too, because you don't know what other communities are going to do or what options are available to them.
Right.
And again, our JPA is about complying with state law and achieving what's required under state law. Robert?
Right.
I tend to agree with Mr. Heller. 0 is not my number. I certainly think that's an admirable goal. But if you're telling me we're going to actually close all of our landfills and deal with all of our waste in another manner, I don't think you're going to achieve it overnight. And overnight could be 2025 or 2030. I don't care what number you put on it. But we are going in that direction, and it's just going to take some time to do it. So
And
today, 0 is not my number.
What about the word continual?
We should
reduction?
probably define zero waste, because that's not.
Yeah, Patty was about to jump out of her skin making me do that. So it's important to understand that most of the zero waste goals that exist in the world actually are at about 90% efficiency. They model the zero waste movement, goals, aspiration after the safety movement, worker safety movement. Just like we're trying to get to 0 workplace incidents and 0 fatalities on the job, we may never get there, but it's the goal that we're working towards. So some communities like Oceanside, have set, we mean it's 75 to 90%. We're trying to get there by this date, and here are some parameters by which we'll do it. Some of them, have accounting methodology in them. What are we counting as we're doing that? Some of them just say we want to reduce disposal from where we are now to some lower number. City of Oakland wanted to go from 400,000 tons to 40,000 tons. So rather than say zero waste, they said, we're getting to 40,000
That's what the
tons.
state has been doing every year, or they keep increasing, which is
Tighten it down.
a natural thing to do. But again, zero waste is a dream. And again, it's never going to happen. I think, again, with people in the industry that have produced products that we have to deal with, on the waste end of the stream, are part of industry standard to get improved. In other words, not up to us, it's people who are designing things that can be disposed of better and easier, and still do the same job. I think we're just people using these things, and they are wanting to get rid of it at the end of their use. But until the industry comes up with better products that can be recycled and things like that, that's what I'm getting at. There's
It's that 26% we saw in the pie chart this morning that you don't have a program for, and there's no technical way of
it'll
dealing
never
with it.
get done. Right.
And so, until the manufacturer changes what they do.
What about using the phrase continual and reduction or continued improvement as opposed to 0?
That's another frame on it. That's more like, maybe it would be continually reduce solid waste disposal in San Luis Obispo County.
I prefer a more aspirational. It may not be one of those things you achieve, but if you set the target, I've seen this throughout various agencies, you have a tendency to at least gear your programs towards better compliance, versus if you don't have that overarching goal. I think it allows us to, as we see a lot in politics, we love to say a lot of things that never actually get done, or even what we're saying, we kind of dance around the subject matter. But if you have an actual goal that you're searching for or trying to achieve, you target that, and you can't just dance around saying that, oh, we will reduce things as they become available or when it's easy or convenient.
I don't know. I think goals should be realistic, not just
Attainable.
Yeah, it should be attainable and realistic. I mean, to me, the idea of zero is not a realistic goal. You know, unless you immediately put asterisks and caveats on it, in which case it's kind of disingenuous. It becomes a soundbite.
Right.
That we're going to achieve zero this or zero that when everybody knows it's not. It's like the 10-year plan to end homelessness. It's like, you know, we're not going to end homelessness or poverty or alcoholism. You know, they're part of the human condition. But we should strive continuously for improvement, not zero.
It's interesting because both of those concepts come out of like the Japanese engineering and manufacturing world, Kaizen, continuous improvement, and zero waste. And actually Toyota was the first one to, at an industrial scale, get to zero waste. Toyota, GM, Ford all do it in manufacturing. Now, to your point, they send us that car and we got to figure out what to do with the car on the other end of it. They didn't create any waste, but
continual process improvement, as the Japanese used to call it.
yeah, Kaizen.
I think for the zero waste comment, I appreciate the effort, but we're also an educational group as well. And I think sometimes when you use a number like that, people don't necessarily take it seriously, and then they just try to throw away the rest of your message. I like the idea of having something aspirational as a goal, but the zero is a little more difficult for us to teach to others, I think, in the whole global effort.
So where do you think the state is headed 10, 20 years from now in terms of percentage?
It's interesting because 4 years ago when they got their new director, they actually put at the headline of their website, you know, California zero waste experts moving California towards zero waste. They use the terminology at CalRecycle quite a lot. Oddly, when Newsom got into office, that sort of disappeared, though he came from a zero waste city and has a lot of support for zero waste programs and things like that. So it was interesting to see that shift in their own messaging. Because the legislature adopted the 75% goal, they felt like they were throttled back to that 75% goal. All right, it sounds like by nose count, zero waste may be too far to go, and that something more like continuous progress towards reduction and disposal may be may gain more consensus.
I just think it's so ambiguous. I mean, that should be our goal no matter what. It's not exactly an aspirational statement.
Yeah,
Yeah, Mr. Ans.
I agree that continued improvement doesn't say much. Could be 0.5% per year. But it appears that the 1383 has set some goals for us. And our only question is, do we want to do more than that? That we will have to do that. And if nothing else, those are our goals.
Yeah.
If nothing else.
Yeah, and there's a very clear clustering of vision around successfully, cost-effectively, coordinated with your members implementing 1383. So I guess the question becomes, do you want to go short of zero? Do you want to say get to 75% recycling rate by 2030? Do you want to say get to 90% by 2050? If you don't want to use the zero waste terminology, do you want to set a rate and a date?
So why don't we go with that? I mean, it's a number. I mean, we have to do it.
Well, zero is zero waste is just a catchphrase.
Mm-hmm.
If zero is offensive or nobody wants to go to zero, then let's pick a different catchphrase. I mean, that's what all this is about, to bring up consciousness. Call it drawing down or call it garbage diet. I don't care what you call it.
Garbage diet.
As long as you don't have zero in it, then the public will probably catch on to it. That's how the littering program was so successful, was don't be a litter bug.
Yep.
And that went over like gangbusters. So if you can find another catchphrase, I'm all for it.
Like it. All right. It sounds like we need to do a little bit more work honing this. I think we've heard the various perspectives. I think we've exhausted the discussion. We can hone in on this and bring it back to you, and you'll probably do a little bit more honing from the dais in a month when we do bring it back. So at this point, I would transition into wrapping up and talking about next steps, but I don't know if you want to open it back up for a last round of public comment or.
Yeah.
Okay, Barbara, can you take public comment one more time?
I sure can. So at this time, if anybody in the audience would like to make a public comment, if you could raise your hand, or if you're on the phone, you can hit *9. Okay, it looks like we have no public comment.
Thank you, Barbara.
All right. So our next steps are to regroup around all that we've heard from you today about the mission, the values, and the vision that you have going forward. We're going to digest that a bit, consolidate the various thoughts that we've got from you, try and make sure that we're capturing all of your pieces in the synthesis that we'll do. And we'll bring that back to you on this wall chart all filled out and completed at your next meeting to talk about, is this what you want us to move forward with as we begin to prepare the strategic plan? Couple of things about the strategic plan, because now that we've got some direction from you, big picture about where we're going, that's our next step, is building the plan document out and the technical pieces of that. And one of the things that I've heard loud and clear from all of you is coordination with your agencies. And so I want to make sure that at the level it needs to happen and at the level that your staff can be available to interact with us around this stuff as we're thinking about the strategic plan, it would be good to get, a TAC meeting or a task force meeting or something like that together of the senior staff to talk about how this all plays out and maybe get their input before we come back with the strategic plan to you guys. But I wanted to check in with you on that before we launched off.
I have a comment about that.
Please.
So we have a meeting August 10th, and 7 of the 8 agencies have confirmed they're going to be at that meeting. And that is to update our integrated waste management plan as an agency, which we have to do every 5 years. But using that as the platform, we're going to introduce the polystyrene ordinance, remind them that that got postponed, but here's what's in it. We're going to talk about 1383. We're going to talk about the strategic plan. So we are reintroducing that communication. We're starting that up again. And then I've heard it mentioned several times that this document is just something we put on the shelf and you never look at again. For us, it's not. For staff, this is going to be what we're going to look at every month when we're putting the agenda together. Any program or any budgetary item, it's going to have to go through this filter. So it's very important for us that we get direction from you. I know you won't discuss it that often, but we will.
To be clear, though, I don't think that we intended that or implied that this entire product would end up on a shelf, just that the mission statement frequently goes on a back burner somewhere.
Maybe so, but a lot of this detail will show up for us.
We think the product is important, or we wouldn't have agreed to spend the money on it.
But I think it should be a focus for Brooks, basically, given our board's direction to them, what we want to see.
Yeah.
Right? That's what you're trying to say.
Yeah, right. It's an important product.
Yeah, very important.
All right. So we'll go off and do that work. We'll be back to you with the refined mission, vision, values for the next meeting, the strategic plan, obviously.
And one more question. So the next update can be at a regular board meeting. We do not need to have the workshop that kind of thing. All right. Well, thank you very much for your attention today. It's been a very productive process.
Thank you. So I do want to get a little clarity because we still left something fairly open-ended. The big difference on our board still seems to be around the whole reality of legislation from this body. How do we factor that into the strategic planning process? Are we just leaving that open because the JPA allows what the JPA allows currently?
I'm gonna try and come back to you in August with something that threads the needle, and it probably will be somewhat unsatisfying to a couple of people from different perspectives, and that'll start a discussion to try and figure out how to go forward. I think today was the beginning of that discussion. And some things at the table to discuss. Strategy, but I think we heard each other. And we're starting to get
Gotcha.
I think it's important though, because as you kind of implied, Aaron, it's the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's a political situation, but it's important because essentially you have a majority of the board of supervisors, it would appear, that's willing to discuss, you know, withdrawing the county from the entity because of what they perceive as an overly active, policy-driven IWMA.
Right. Things have changed, in my opinion, from where we were originally when we came here to something different now, right? That's the rub, I think, that we're seeing.
And my concern is, you know, is there a way, as far as strategic planning is concerned, is how to potentially make a few tweaks in the JPA that would satisfy the county as an entity, regardless of who the majority of the moment is, but that the county as an entity does represent a huge proportion of the population of the county. And I think regardless of who that majority on the board of supervisors is, there, three supervisors might be reluctant to have things dictated to their constituents by by the cities. And that's the concern, and the extent is the question as to what extent can that be accommodated to keep the organization together, because I sure as hell don't, as a city, you know, I don't want to see the IWMA broken into pieces, if you will, because if the county goes off on their own, there's nothing to say that they would invite any other city to join them in a new JPA. Yeah. So we would all, you know, be stuck trying to make do with a smaller entity that's less supported.
Yeah, which I think we have to have that conversation.
Yeah.
At some point.
I agree. I think we absolutely must have that conversation.
In a very real and weigh out the options, because just because you break apart an entity, you can have that which is left still be more effective for their desires, and that splits off and creates their own more effective in creating their desires. It isn't ideal to have it split, but if you have two different goals that are set out by those various groups that are in them, that's kind of the reality of representative government.
It could be, there would be a substantial cost in that, as we know, it would not be a very efficient overall.
No.
I think there's value to realize that we sit here today making these decisions with the hope that we are also a group in 10 to 20 years from now when other people are going to be sitting here making similar decisions. And so I think sometimes it's just a matter of really looking within ourselves too and finding out what is best for our constituents, what is financially feasible for all of us, given the parameters that Brooks has to adhere to. California is not going to change too much in the way it's forcing communities in a good way to adhere to certain changes. And so really it's also looking within ourselves to seeing what can we do to best bring a consensus to our group. Sometimes we get so locked and polarized in our political beliefs, it separates us, and sometimes we need to step back a little bit. Maybe there's some consensus there that we can work on together that will allow us to stay together, because I think that's in the best interest of our group.
Yes.
I'm wondering too, if it becomes such an issue, maybe it should go to the people. I mean, other counties have taken it to their voters, right?
Not in the way you're talking about. In Alameda County, the proposition was voter started. Environmentalist groups rallied to do that.
You mean to create an IWMA-like agency? Yep. But that was many, many years ago when these were relatively still new.
When the garbage barge was going up and down the East Coast.
So, I mean, these entities were relatively new at that time, right? Yeah. Okay.
So they didn't have the equivalent of an IWMA. So they created one. Exactly. I see. Okay.
Most of them are self-created, as you guys did. You enter into a JPA And it's sort of, we all recognize the benefits. In that case, it was the voters imposed it on all of the county and all of the cities and said, this is how we want our county to work. And in their case, you can't leave. It really would have to go to the voters. I think there are a number of governance issues that need to be worked out in here, and Charles flagged a few of them earlier this morning, and some of that will go into some suggestions in the strategic plan, and there will be a pillar around governance reform and JPA reform. It's just natural in an organization like this. But I think that's something that you're all going to have strong feelings about what the content of that is, and so we'll need to spend some time with your senior staff and then with you guys ultimately on how that all works and how that plays out.
All right. Anything else? Meeting's adjourned.
Traffic starts.